Ready? Our microphone? Yeah, there we go. Sounds like there's a little traffic coming over from the shore, so I know Chairman Tanker is supposed to be here soon. Until he gets in, Chris said he'd be able to help out kind of with the approval of minutes and things. So thanks everyone for coming down. As usual, at the end of the meeting, we have the travel expense forms. Josh has those, so he'll be able to grab those. Otherwise, I'm happy to email them out as usual.
I never do that.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey everyone, good evening. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting. I was up in Riverhead, New York that week, I think for the council meeting, and I gave up a seafood buffet to be on that call, and I was, I wish I could have been here because it was really hard to listen in with background noise and everything. It's good to see everyone again face to face. We let you know, if you haven't heard, we finally do have a new commissioner. Justin Worrell was our acting commissioner from January through mid-June, and on June 22nd, they announced that Jamie Green, who was a long-time law enforcement officer, who was deputy chief of law enforcement, was named our commissioner. So he's taken over. If you get a chance, say hi to him. Some of you already know him. He's a good guy. And he's been with the agency for about 17 years. He's kind of rose through the ranks, and recently he's deputy chief. Also, if you don't know, our Secretary of Natural Resources is Travis Voiles. He's still in his title is acting secretary because of the way it works. He wasn't, I'm not going to get into it, but he has to be approved by the General Assembly. So his title will be acting secretary until the General Assembly meets next year, and they'll make that permanent. So if you see our letterhead and it says acting, that's why. It's a thing that the General Assembly has to approve that. So without further ado, I guess Chris is going to chair the meeting for a few minutes, and we'll get going on it. So thanks a lot, guys.
All right, thanks everyone for attending tonight. I think the first order of business is just minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Do you need a copy? Thanks. Good Peter. Look over them.
And just let us know if there's any objections, corrections.
Is there any changes? Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes?
I'll make it.
Second?
No, sorry.
All right. All in favor? I think we can probably do this one. Any opposed? We'll go with that. No one's opposed. All right. So it sounds like the minutes are good.
All right, thank you. So, quick recap. You've seen this a few times now this year. Total juvenile and adult male blue crab abundances were at or near record lows in the 2021-2022 winter dredge survey. Adult female abundance was below average, still higher than pre-2008 period, still not being overfished, overfishing not occurring. Scientists and managers do have concerns about recruitment. For some reason, those females aren't turning into the juvenile crops we're hoping for, so that's something, we're working to improve with the committee, with the management, and also we've got scientists looking into that. We've got a data workshop coming up with the Chesapeake Bay Stock Assessment Committee next month, so we're hoping to get a little more into that, hopefully get a new stock assessment started, seeing if there's things in the model we're missing. Quick snapshot of what this year is looking like so far. As you can see, Every month has been lower than, I think, any time in the previous 3 years. I wouldn't look at August yet. We're still, obviously August isn't over, so we've got more reports coming in, but May through June, we've got pretty good reporting rates so far. So I wouldn't think those are too far off our final values.
Just based on how many crab pots are on the dock, it's not much.
Can I ask a question while we're on this slide?
Sure.
So we're now electronic reporting for all the fishery, correct?
All the crab fishery, yeah.
All the crab fishery. Are you all seeing the need to make many adjustments now, like the month after or things like that? Like, what are maybe the percentages that are changing with electronic reporting in place now versus?
So just as an update, in 2019, before we started going oysters online, we're about 20% of our fishery online total for Virginia. We're up to 98% as of this month. So it's quite a considerable leap in electronic reporting. We aren't finding much that we need to go back and fix. There were plenty of errors within the paper reporting as well. So we are not seeing an overall uptick. In fact, with the online reporting, there's a downtick in many errors. Meaning, for example, for oysters, if a rock's not open, you can't select it. If you don't have that harvest gear, you can't select it. So that eliminates a lot of errors right off the bat with trying to do those things. So it has been very successful. And as far as reporting, something like July, I think we're missing still 80, July is still 100 people with blue crab license who have yet reported. Yeah, so that's probably the most accurate month, but it is considerably lower compared to the other years.
And that's either activity or non-activity.
So that some of those might be.
It could be no activity, correct? They just have a blue crab license.
Yeah.
One thing I think too, Adam, with the paper reporting, you never have July's results up there if you were relying on the paper, because it was always 3 months behind.
Mm-hmm.
So this is more up to date than we've ever had
Yeah,
it. So,
through June is extremely
Yep.
accurate.
yeah.
Yep.
And then July's pretty good, and like I said, I probably should have cut off August there.
And one more follow-up, if you don't mind. I know the commission made, not suggestions, but allowed commercial harvesters to come into the regional offices to report if they weren't connected electronically. I know there were a couple people on the Northern Neck. Are people having to do that, or are they finding that they're able to connect?
We have sent out notifications to everyone that staff is available in this office, and we set up appointments at our satellite offices, both in Gloucester and the Northern Neck area. We do have very few people that take advantage of that, but all you have to do is call staff, and you can bring this back. Call staff, we'll set an appointment, we'll set up a regional appointment, and we will walk you through that process to try and get you to a point where you can do it. But there are a lot of online tutorials already and so on and so forth. So.
All right, great, thank you. I'm Circus Chair right now. Is that Mr. Bowers?
One of the things that strikes me from this statistics I'm seeing here is that you're averaging like 10 trips per month. It would be really interesting. I bet you Mr. Diggs here does more than 10 trips a month. It would be really interesting to see it would be really interesting to see a distribution of the trips per month, especially if we're starting to talk about restrictions and things like that. Because
I'm glad you asked that, because later on when we get into some of our transfers, we're actually going to have in 2021, how many harvest days people crabbed.
Yeah, but again, part of what, when you look at an overcapitalized fishery, which this is how many people are doing it full-time, and that includes other fisheries and other gear types, and how many people are doing it like, I'm going to take, a week off in 3 weeks, and I'm going to crab for a week, and that's it, or something.
So you can also see in May, June, we've had about 100 fewer harvesters. Actually, most of the April too comes close, about 100 fewer harvesters than in 2021.
Jason, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think in the harvest, that's the least amount I've ever seen. I think that's, it is a low number, and it's amazing, that it is. I mean, dispute Tom's claim, I mean, it's less people crabbing there than I've ever been in the last 25 years, as far as I
It's
know.
scary sometimes how many, it's like nobody out there.
I know, it's
Sometimes
not-
with certain parts of the river, you'll go a whole day, and if they're good spots, and you'll never even see somebody
I mean,
the whole day, so.
Crab fishery's not getting much pressure, and that shows it right there, the amount of harvest, I'll say that.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the market gave y'all a reduction this year, a big one.
That's right.
Very big.
You can't find a
How are prices different than last year?
Very different.
50% less.
Terrible.
Oh, okay.
That's part of it.
Free money.
That's part of it, and then there was no crabs, earlier on. The prices are less and the expenses are high.
Yeah, it's crazy. Before that had last year.
How is crabbing as far as you guys are seeing? I've heard people say it's terrible. I've heard people say it's really started to pick up in the last
James
few.
River, it's probably been the best summer we've had in 8 or 10 years. It's
Okay.
plenty of crabs. It's harder to find a place to sell them than it is to catch them.
Interesting.
You wouldn't believe it by our winter growth survey, but a lot of females showing up now, everywhere.
I caught more crabs in August than I did during the spring.
Yeah, spring was low.
That's like unheard of.
I
How
don't know
about-
where they came from, but they showed up this month.
How about juveniles? I was just at
Seeing a lot of juveniles.
I was at Chip Oaks last weekend, and I found so many molts.
There should have
You
been
don't
a
see
lot
too
of
many
them,
'cause of the
I'm
wind.
crabbing right there, and I see them on the decks where we hadn't been seeing them the past few years. You see them in the water when you're crabbing in the dark, but it's plenty of them like that running up and down. That you should see them because that's the same size you're talking about is the same size that we're seeing plenty of too.
Okay.
They can dodge the catfish and the red drum.
Run the gauntlet.
Yeah.
That was all of lots of.
One other question about the table. It looks like our max number of harvesters this year is 480, just under 500. Do you know how many licenses we've actually sold this year? It's okay, it's
Yeah,
gonna
it's,
be
it's gonna be a little later.
Okay, thanks.
And this is only crab pots.
Right.
Yeah, I can't remember them.
Any other questions?
Actually, you know what? I think I've got it right here.
Any other questions before we leave this slide?
1,002.
What's down below? I mean, what's down below this one? Crab pot license sold.
Yeah.
400 some, so we only got about 45%.
Yeah, we've had
Important.
we've had 640 active, so obviously not everyone's fishing every month.
Yeah,
So, but across the year, we've had 640 people reporting.
that's low. That's lowest I've been.
Mm-hmm. So just a reminder, this was what we'd voted on at our previous meeting. So you've got your status quo, and then you've got, this year is that low bushel from October 1st to November 30th, and then next year, low bushel from March 17th to May 15th. And that was with the agreement that more long-term changes would be taking place, and that's what we're starting to talk about today. That's not, we're not talking about everything today. You know, we don't want to keep you guys here till 11 o'clock. So today, we're just covering agents and transfers. And then some of the other measures, any changes to the sanctuary, pot tagging, and those other things, we'll talk about at another meeting. I'll probably send you guys another doodle poll, probably in the next week or two, and the next week. So, and these were our options as ranked by you all on June 8th. So I know agents and transfers were there at the top along with sanctuary. Ram is still looking at the sanctuary, so I'm gonna be touching base with him, see how far along they are on that. So, getting into the agents discussion, you've all seen this graph before. About 9% of our harvest per year is harvested on trips that used an agent. Made it all right?
Yes, thank you, sorry for being late.
No worries. And you've seen this as well. These are some of our demographics. We have filled up for 2022, but did not include that. Some things change. You know, we can still take medical applications, people still switching out agents. So some statistics about agent use. Last year, 100 licensees reported using agents. So on their reports, used agent, they checked yes. 72 of those 100 licensees use an agent more than 75% of trips. I can tell you a lot of them were using an agent 100% of trips. 11 use an agent 50 to 75%. So I'd say 83 used an agent as part of their business plan, not as a, oh, days I can't go out, I can have someone else fill in, but planning on having their agent do most of the crabbing for the season. So a few of the options that staff have talked about. One is to move towards having temporary agents. So something happens, you've got to, go out of town for an emergency. You don't want to leave your pots untended in the water. You can apply to the agency and get a permit for some number of days. We're kind of thinking somewhere between 7 and 14. We can talk about that. And then in that time, an agent carries a permit that says, I'm an agent for so-and-so from this date to this date. And you can't plan emergencies, so have up to 2 of those permits per year. Another option that some watermen had suggested to us was have those temporary agents in the spring, March through May, and then have the current system start June 1. So not allow the permanent agents till after the spring season. But again, you can't plan emergencies, so we're not going to say no agents until June, but allow temporary in case something happens.
If somebody really has a medical problem, in this day and time, and somebody needs to take their pots up for them, as many police boats and stuff as it is, could they not call their office and could they not be like, this guy's gonna have this guy's pots, they're taking them up? Would that be really that hard? Is you really gotta get permits and do all this for weeks at a time? All you really have, it would be real simple. You can call him when you transplant oysters. You say, hey, I'm transplanting oysters. He says, okay, I'm watching. So if somebody had to go out and get somebody's pots, if that's a big argument, is it really that hard? Does it really gotta be all this? Couldn't they just, if that's what this is really intended to be, wouldn't that be, looks like to me we're doing a lot to try to accomplish something that could be done a lot easier.
I think we'd want to have some sort of paper trail, just, CYA for the licensee, for the guy who's pulling his pots, who doesn't want to get pulled over and someone doesn't have that.
Well, I said if they
So,
notified
but
the
we
police
are,
that was going on, if they notified the law enforcement office in that area that it was going on, I don't see why that would be a problem.
but we are talking about possibly moving this whole permitting thing online, so it's not, having to come down to our office and file the paperwork and waiting for the approval. Try to get that a little more streamlined. Because again, I don't think we'd want to attach reasons to this, not like you have to give us a doctor's note in order to get a temporary. Because like I said, someone has a funeral out of town, you can't plan that ahead of time. So we want to make it flexible, but still convenient.
And I think the point of this is if you have 400 crab pots in the water and you have to go out of town because your aunt passed away in Texas, you could leave for 4 or 5 days and allow those to continue to be fished. This isn't,
Oh,
hey,
yeah,
I wanna
mean,
take
I
all my
understand
pots out of the
that.
water.
I
We
understand
do
that.
have that available if there's an emergency.
I mean,
you
I'm
do
just
need to
saying, if
get your
somebody
equipment
keels
out.
over and dies.
We already
If
have
somebody
that
keels over
available.
and dies, you should be able to take the pots up. I can't see our VMRC writing you a ticket up for going out and getting the man's pots.
And you're right,
for
we
this.
do have
And
that.
if they
We-
did, they'd
We
be
do have
common
that
and the judge
available,
that
reasonable through
can't
our
see
law
a judge
enforcement
writing you a
office to be
ticket
able to do
either.
that. So that's already in place. I think that's outside of, those dire emergencies for your personal self and all your equipment needs to come out, we do have the ability to be able to do that. This would be trying to get all 500 of those harvesters here and there for their individual ones. So that is already covered through law enforcement.
And then the third option would just be the current system, but have fewer than 125 permits. Again, that doesn't fix, it still means certain people would have the benefit of agents and other people wouldn't. You know, like Adam said, your aunt dies in Texas, and we're at 125, we don't have an exception for that.
We're taking 9.3%.
So a temporary to allow someone to temporarily fish those pots, or if necessary, pull them if it's something a little more long-lasting.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Back before we had the system we have now, I used to lobby in Richmond a lot, and I'd be in there, half the winter. And boy, it worked for me. I used to take my boat dredging, and it would be, 2 or 3 days a week, sometimes 2 or 3 months, depending on the length of the session. How would this be able to accommodate somebody with a problem like that? I don't do it anymore. I'm just being hypothetical about this. Would that be possible? I mean, that's
Not
still-
under the current system, well, not under the current system unless you'd already, put your application in February for the year.
Well,
Otherwise, you
any
might get
problem with
shut
the
out.
application,
But
I'm just thinking about the 7 to 14 days, I'd burn them up in January. And most of the time I was up there, I was doing state business.
Mhm.
I mean, you would
So-
think that they would be able to commission, or somebody would be able to override something like that. I mean, it's not like all 500 of those people are gonna end up there lobbying. You'd be lucky if it was 1 or 2.
So the twice a year would be, moving towards temporary agents would be moving away from the agent as business plan. And I'm not
I'm not trying to
sure,
complicate things.
Yeah, no.
I'm just, throwing something out there, somebody gets in a bad car wreck and they're laid up for, 2 or 3 months. If they couldn't have somebody run their boat, their help would lose their jobs.
Mhm.
Could there be an accommodation for a situation like that? And you've heard my position on this anyway, but there's got to be some way to accommodate a catastrophe. And the legislature's pretty much a catastrophe. So is a car accident. So is a heart attack. These are small businesses with usually a minimum of 1, maybe 2 or 3 employees involved that's going to, be affected by the owner not being able to go. I just want to put the thought out there that there needs to be some way to accompany that in this without being, you want to solve the problem that's been created, but you don't want to be cruel about it at the same time, cause somebody to end up having to go out of business.
yeah, a lot of our measures do have exceptions based on, catastrophe, if nothing else, that, medical, if there's a
Right.
heart attack, car accident, that is something we can talk about including in this system.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Alexa, so we do 125 agents a year, that's where it's capped off at now. So that starts December 1st, I guess, something like that?
I think January is when they start processing requests.
January.
And then we take 125 of the first ones to come in.
Right, first come, first served?
Yep.
Yeah. So anybody applies after you get your 125 cap, they're not going.
Oh, yeah, I got phone calls from
Okay.
numbers 126, 127,
Oh, yeah, right.
128 this year,
I
and
noticed last year was 129, that's why I asked, but is that considered emergency?
that was medical. So,
Medical.
you know, we hit 125 and someone gets in a car accident or sprains their wrist, there is a medical
Okay.
exception.
Oh.
So I think
So the
we
way the
had-
agent deal with, I mean, I've never used the agent, but who does the reporting? Does the person that has the license report, or does the agent report?
I think it can be done at either. It gets reported under the licensee's MRC ID,
Uh-huh.
and then there's a box to check that says used agent,
agent.
and then they put in their MRC ID.
Okay, suppose they don't have an MRC ID.
They do.
Okay.
So if you don't have one when you apply, we issue you one,
Okay.
because that's how we issue the permit to the agent.
Well, I was going through some old crab regulations that I had here, and I was surprised to see, under section C here of 20-610-10, it says, "Any person licensed to harvest blue crabs commercially shall not be eligible to also serve as an agent."
Mhm.
So how do they serve as an agent if they have a commercial license?
They don't have a commercial, well, some of them have commercial licenses, they just don't have crab licenses.
Okay.
But there's also people who don't have a commercial card, and we say, okay, we don't have any information on you, so we're gonna create you an MRC ID.
Okay.
Usually, it's one of the N numbers, like our recreational guys get.
Okay.
So you don't have a commercial card, but you have that unique identifier. But if you've got, you know, oyster licenses, hook and line, you can still serve as an agent. It's just if you have any crab licenses, our system will throw up a flag.
Okay.
Two things. Number one is an observation. I think you're approaching it, I want to give you a different way to think about who can get an agent, not who can become an agent. And that is, Mr. Diggs here works 24 days a month. He hurts himself. He needs an agent for 6 weeks while his knee recovers or his ankle recovers or whatever. He's been working that way for years. He ought to be able to get an agent to cover for him, no matter what the reason is, for a moderate period of time, even months. Especially if he's got a crew, because he's coming back, and more important than that, he has been working full-time on the operation for a long time, or for a relatively long time, that year even, is something to think about. Rather than saying the agents can't be temporary or have to be temporary, you say that you can get an agent if you're really working full-time and you need one to cover for you. You got people out there, if you look at it, you're averaging 10 days, 10 trips per month, and they can get an agent, you know, and which to me says there are a reason, statistically, there's bound to be a bunch of them that are 1 day a month or 2 days a month. And they shouldn't, they aren't working full-time. That's not their business and their livelihood. So, you know, I don't know how to address it in regulation, but the concept being, yes, you're full-time, this is your livelihood, you've got a problem, you need to get an agent for a while, fine. But what I think I have pushed against, and I think other members here have, is the agents for full-time on the operation, and the owner of the license never works it. And the exception I can do that for Doug, so Doug doesn't have to say it, is if you have a family member and you're retiring out of the industry or phasing out of the industry, that family member ought to be able to work as a license as an agent on your gear. But I also think they should have a commercial card. And the second thing is, you said they get their commercial, they don't have a commercial license. There is a state code section that explicitly says to harvest seafood for sale, you have to have a commercial card. Yes, there is a state code section that says that. Now, somebody can interpret that to mean the agency says, no, we don't have to do that. But state code is what the agency is supposed to follow.
I believe our
I know
our
they have.
representative from the Office of the
But
Attorney
that-
General.
but
did not.
how are you getting around state code? This is a Dillon rule state. You have to do what state code says as an agency.
I believe her interpretation is that it still works within state code.
So what, well, but what license, what commercial waterman's card do they have in their name? They don't.
The one they're using.
No, that is not in their name. That's transferring that is transferring a commercial waterman's card. Temporarily transferring, which is also illegal by state code, but the Attorney General's office says we've been doing it all these years, so it's okay. And I disagree with that. Just because we've been doing it, there was prejudice and all that stuff going on for years. And Jim Crow laws and all those things. That was going on for years. It was wrong. It was against many laws for these things to happen. And finally, people woke up and said, we have to obey the law and do it. And I don't understand, I'm not gonna win this argument tonight, I know that. I just wanna go on the record as saying state code says you can't transfer a commercial card. And state code says you have to have a commercial card to harvest seafood for sale. Now, Doug's son has a commercial card. He should, I'm pretty sure he does, doesn't he, Doug?
Yeah, well, he's not an agent anymore.
Okay, but when he was an agent, he had a commercial card.
Listen that y'all arguing fuss over nothing so much. I went on and gave him my license so he wouldn't have to be an agent. But
Yep.
the point I wanted to make, and I've always made, was this. I know some elder people that they lost their husband. And they depend on that crabbing license for somebody to use it so they can have a little extra income. And when the crabs get cheap, they get a few crabs from them to pick out and make crab cakes so they can have some during the winter. A valid license is a valid license, whether that individual is using it or whether the agent is using it. So what is the big deal anyhow about the agent name? What I want to know. Somebody just wants less crabbers out there, hell, they cut back crabbers and pay them for their license for. Like that when Jack Traversy and Rob O'Reilly was around here to solve a problem of getting less crabbers out there. But if a person has a valid license and they are 75 years old and is a woman, you expect them to go out there and crab that license? They can't do it. So they can use an agent and benefit from it. Is that wrong? If it is, then I'm wrong. I shouldn't be here.
I think part of the issue we were trying to address with this when this first came up was that we've got some folks that are using these agents full-time, and the agents aren't held responsible in a lot of cases. Certain areas of the state where it's occurring. And, you guys were the ones who wanted to make this, we brought this up several times. And every time we've ended up with this discussion, we've gone nowhere. But you put this as your #1 item to discuss. And, and I think a lot of the concerns that we were having with, some of the areas of the Eastern Shore in the springtime, what was going on there. And I don't know if, we can't solve this for every solution, but, and I don't think we can, without doing something, we can't solve that issue we're having on Eastern Shore.
I'm just curious, 9.4% of the total harvest is a substantial chunk, but yet you're gonna cut and for a system that's really being abused, it's not what it was intended to be. We're just gonna say that's okay, but then take away from the people that are out there full time. Like me, I'm gonna lose 40% of my catch. What business even survives during that? What business in the United States survives when you cut your business 40%? Because if so, if they're hiring, I'd like to go work with them to see what I'm doing wrong. You know what I mean? Because that's what's about to happen when I get to lose 40% of my, the other crabbers lose 20 somehow, a lot less percent. Why we lose 40, I don't know. When they cut the limits back
Oh.
to 27,
Oh.
47 to
Okay.
27, I lose 20 bushels, he loses 8. I find that really, that's insane. I mean, I don't understand what,
Yeah, we had to give up crab dredging, that was only 10% of our
and
harvest.
we had to give all this up, but yet I'm gonna have to go do this for something that's being abused, that's not even done. 10%, we're just like, oh, that's nothing, let's just keep doing it because we've been doing it. But then you're gonna take people that are full-time, dealing with full-time people, full-time industries, full-time businesses, and cut them out, or basically shut them down here soon. You know, because I mean, with the prices of everything, as high as expenses are, what are people supposed to do? I mean, I just don't see how that's right on any front. I mean, it's not, what they're doing was supposed to be a medical thing. It wasn't supposed to be a business plan. It was not supposed to be a business model. And now we're sitting here taking away, we've done shut down crab dredging, so that's 10%. That's a whole fishery shut down that could be accounted for because of agency right there. Now we're gonna cut bushel limits, cut this, so what are we supposed to do? Just shut everything down? I mean, that's crazy. We're shutting stuff down for something that's not even supposed to be happening.
I mean, that's right. I mean, people have made this their business model.
I understand, but that's really not even legal, so why should I be sitting here defending the full-time people when y'all are sitting here defending something that shouldn't even be going on? I mean, why should I lose 40? I just don't even understand that. When the new limits, that's 40%. 40%. What business survives on a 40% cut? What business? Does anybody know? Anybody out there? I would love it. I would love to see it. Like I said, if they got applications out, I'll go for a few days to see what I am doing wrong. But we're gonna cut that out and sit here and argue about keeping something going that we're really just turning a blind eye at. 9.4% of the total harvest in the state of Virginia. How many pounds is that? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, I'm not mad. Like I said, if I wasn't getting cut, I could care less. I could care less if you have 100 agents out there. But the fact that I'm taking the hit for something that's not supposed to be going on, and I mean, it's not just me. There's other full-time crabbers that they're going to be dealing with this. Maybe they don't care because they're going to go oystering, but you're putting me out of business. Like that, you're putting him out of business. I saw Johnny. We're going there. What are we supposed to do? Everybody just throw your hands up and walk away?
As I said, we are
Yeah,
planning on
same.
looking at the bushel the lower bushel standardization.
I mean, how do you let one section of crabber lose 40%, one lose 20? I mean, it should be fair. I mean, to begin with, that's not right. That is not. Nobody can look at that and say that that's right.
Good. Down the table there.
I'm tired of arguing about agents anyway. It's only been a couple of years. I use one, and the reason I started is because we were allowed to, to be legal. But one thing I'm sure some people realize that. I know 2 or 3 young crabbers now, which, like JC said, nobody young's getting into this. They're an agent on those licenses this year until they can afford to buy one. It's like impossible to get into stuff, and we can all say that's not our problem, and that's fine. I get that, but there's, you got to look at it like that too. Everybody can't afford to go buy everything all at once anymore, especially now.
I just want to address what Pat said. I think it was Pat anyway. That, not all of us up here wanted to do away with the agent thing. And, a couple up here, they really do want to do away with it. I just feel like they're just jealous because somebody else has got more pots than they've got. And I think that's what started a lot of it, just a jealousy thing.
Yeah, we can talk about jealousy. The bottom line is Cape Charles area. People are fishing anywhere from 1,400 to 2,000 pots. That's what it's all, in my opinion, this is what it's all about. I gave up on trying to get rid of agents. My opinion, I don't want them. I think they're bad for the fishery, period. Plain and simple. That's my opinion, right or wrong. But, we're trying to curtail the spring harvest is I think, where this started. The medical problem, I understand that. I'm not against that, period. If somebody's hurt or whatever, that's fine. But something definitely needs to get done. Either, the way I look at it, we can go with all the agents in the world and start pot tagging and go with that. I mean, you gotta stop it somewhere. Where are you gonna make a decision to stop it? We can argue around and around all day long about agents. We can do that forever.
Hadn't somebody fish 1,400 pots and get away with it.
There's a way they get away with it because it's
I
deep
don't
water.
understand as many law enforcement officers.
That's a straight up law enforcement issue.
The pots suck under. You can't count
How
them.
about the same regulation we did, 2 weeks?
Say we get away with agents, then where does the rest of this stop? I mean, there's still other things you want to talk about. How much do we need to cut? You know, like Ken Junior said, we took 40% from the big license, and this would be 9.4. How far are we gonna go?
Yeah.
I just feel like we're
So
taking
we don't
everything.
see this as reducing harvest by the full 9.3%, because some people are going to start fishing, they're gonna transfer to other people who are interested. You know, the idea going into this was the bushel limits were our hard number. We can calculate the effect. We can't calculate the effect of agents, but we know we have to do more.
I understand that, but y'all have to realize you can't keep taking, especially now with the cost of everything. I mean, I get it, but I just can't take. A lot of people can barely make it now, and they can't just go get another job. I mean, I don't know.
Yes, sir, got another.
Alexa, can you go back to the old screen that showed the amount of agents used? Not that one, that one. Let me see, no. The one that shows the out-of-state agents.
That's it. I don't understand how these numbers don't
Okay,
add up.
right. 9. So it was 9 in last year, were actually out-of-state.
Yeah, so last year, 9 of the agents had out-of-state licenses, out-of-state driver's licenses.
So anybody in any state, if it's a crap out license for sale, they can come and buy it. There's no restriction on anybody buying a license from, you do not have to be a Virginia resident to buy a license, right?
Pay more for it.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Because, you know, I mean, I heard that there was some crab buyers up in Maryland, I mean, they came down and bought a lot of licenses, you know, at one time, so that's why I was concerned. That's been my biggest concern is out of state.
They've all gone to Maryland.
It's out of state is a hard dog to chase because it's fairly easy to get an in-state address and then to put that on
Yeah.
your MRC ID. And then they read as in-state, but they might be living out of state or have their primary operations out of state.
So if we do away with the spring agent, that would eliminate this, right?
Wouldn't,
Part of it. Yeah.
and not eliminate it, but,
But they
you
wouldn't
know,
be allowed-
I know the concern with the out-of-state I mostly heard of as being in the
They wouldn't be
spring.
allowed to use the agent in the spring, according to one of your options.
Mhm.
You could use, during the summer, option 2, said no agents in the spring, but everything else would be normal the rest of the summer.
Right, so we'd start taking the agent applications, it would fill up at 125 or some other number, but they wouldn't be able to act as an agent until June 1.
And how long would that last? June 1 till,
End of the year.
and then
I just, one question.
The agents, I think you had, was 72 agents that use it like 100% of the time up on your graph that you had up there.
Yeah, so,
Are they, is that like long-term? They've been getting agents for years and years and years. Do you have any kind of breakdown on that?
I don't have that. I do know a lot of the people who get agents have consistently had agents. Often they consistently have the same agent. I don't have any data on that.
Another comment down, yes, sir.
What would happen, I'm gonna change the subject a little bit now. If you got sick in your oyster, what happens then?
And they're bad too.
I can't get him for an agent to go on my boat.
What do you mean?
You're not allowed to age commercial license.
Yeah, but can you give your oyster license to somebody else?
If you get sick, what's the difference? Sick?
Yeah, I believe there's no agents in the oyster fishery.
What I'm saying is, you don't have any agents in oysters. If you get sick, you get sick. You can't get nobody to go.
Call potting's the same way. You're not allowed to have an agent. There's a.
So what's the difference?
There's a bunch of different fisheries that don't allow agents, you know.
So you
period.
can't have one 6 months of the year. Why are you worried about the other 6 months?
Well, I'd say the big difference between oyster and crab is that You've got crab pots out, those are just gonna keep
Yeah, but you pick
collecting.
crab pots up in 2 days. I don't care who's got what, unless they got a lot.
It ain't like they're free. Nobody's gonna let them just sit there. They'll make sure.
That
somebody
agent
gets-
was made for a purpose, and we've done everything but do it, what we were supposed to do. And I blame y'all for that, because you let it go too far. It was for a medical reason only. And we've been sitting down here for the last 3 years discussing the same thing, over and over and over. If it went back to what it was supposed to be, you wouldn't have a problem.
Said if we get rid of them, where does all this, where do you draw the line?
But didn't someone down there say that it's been going on so long now that it's grandfathered in?
That's the
Attorney General
transfer,
said
that's,
It was
I was
supposed to be
talking about
done.
the concept of using somebody else's license and, to crab, or to harvest seafood commercially when you don't have a license. In my opinion, an agent, which is never, I'm never gonna win on this, I know it. But in my opinion, any agent in any fishery ought to have a commercial card to start with. Even if it's a young man coming into the fishery, he can get his commercial card and then start, when he's a helper, he can pay and get his commercial card, and then if he were to become an agent, he'd have his own commercial card. But
I know some recreational people got even 50, 75, 100 pots going at their crib just like I do. And selling them. Ain't got no code, ain't got no number, ain't got no nothing.
That's the way to go, you got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I mean,
If you
maybe
get
if
caught,
we
what
just
you
put
gonna
it
do?
on, I mean, it'd be different if we weren't operating on all the full-time guys. I mean, instead of getting rid of them, why don't you just put a benchmark on it? When the population recovers, we'll do it just like we did dredging, put a benchmark on it. When it recovers, we'll reconsider it. That's simple. We did it to that. We shut down a whole fishery and now we're sitting here arguing about this. This is crazy. I mean, it'd be different if we were good. I could understand having agents. I understand it. I'm not against agents, but I mean, if you're gonna shut the rest of the industry down, it's not enough for the full-time guys. It shouldn't be enough for that. I mean, in all reality, and like he said, if you get sick oystering, nobody cares. I mean, 9% is what I'm stuck on. That's what I'm stuck on. Like you said, we shut down a fishery on count of like 10%. So it is a big deal. We can act like it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. Really, it is a big deal when it comes to, you know, whether we're gonna have more bushel limits or shut down stuff or start then or start later. That's what I'm stuck on. I don't, you know, I understand it completely. I'm not against it, but I'm against it 100% if it's gotta come at the expense of full-time people.
The other thing is how many, what do they call them, latent licenses do we have?
A lot.
That people
Lot.
can't get back in the fishery, and yet other people are allowed to have 2, 3 rigs? You know, this is, like he said, it's gotten way out of hand.
These latent people could buy another license just like some of us had.
Just to reset this, we've been here about an hour. The reason all this came up is one of the first slides here, winter dredge survey, one of the worst ones we've seen. So in reaction to that, all 3 jurisdictions said to conserve, we believe about a 7 to 10%. So we came in with bushel limits. Those bushel limits we did was about 4%. And that's what this committee agreed, that was probably the right thing to do, because there's other things in this fishery that we can do that we can't quantify, that we inherently know are good, and we inherently know can conserve females and help the population. So this was something that this committee prioritized, that yes, we believe agents is something that does have some savings to the fishery, and we can do it rather than cutting bushel limits all the way through the season. So I think that's where we are bringing it back to red. This is something we've talked through 3 different CMAC meetings about, and we are looking to this committee to direct what they want the future of this fishery to look like as we go through.
So let me just, can I surmise?
Absolutely.
Say back to you, what you're saying is agents are a way for us to reduce the catch. We got rid of agents.
Correct. Or not get rid of it, but if we do them differently,
Right.
we can reduce the effort that section of the fishery is putting on.
But let me finish. I want to mention one, we talked about oyster folks, and if there aren't any agents. Well, you remember 12 years ago, we thought the Virginia Seafood Council came in front of this body and said, oysters are extinct. We need to now have Chinese oysters, and we got lucky and we didn't do that, and oysters have come back. But because there were so few oysters, we didn't allow Asians. It just didn't make sense. Are we there now with crabs? It just doesn't make sense. We can't have the fat on the bone for Asians. We gotta cut it down to, hey, if you can get up in the morning and go, you gotta go.
And you've heard in previous meetings recently, Dr. Lipschitz come and say, yes, he is concerned about the blue crab population as compared to 2008. This was a poor survey. So this committee we're looking for direction so that you can help guide the industry in what direction to go versus staff just deciding this is what's best for you.
Yes, sir.
That leads us back to the predation of everything. All these fish, the drum, the catfish, the rockfish are plentiful. And they even done seen 15-pound snakeheads at home, full of crabs, little crabs, full of them. Department of Game and Inland Fisheries are steadily turning them loose, snakeheads. I mean, how do we beat this?
It's something we can't just regulate out of the fishery. We agree it's a problem, but it's not something that just can be regulated
Y'all are
out.
steady taking from the water to get what y'all want, and it ain't right. Somebody else needs to be held accountable for a little bit of it.
Anybody else got any? I mean, yeah, things aren't right. The day isn't right like it used to be, but we gotta deal with what we got. You know what I mean? And I don't think we're having anybody coming down and making it better for us without us participating in it. You know what I mean? Yeah. The governor's not gonna do something, you know, we're gonna have to do it ourselves. And agents was something we talked about. We had a significant number of people from Cape Charles that were here that talked to us about what they saw as the abuse of agents. And these were guys that are on the water a lot. They see it.
I mean, I'm just saying is that we see all this, but we're basically arguing on that on the expense of the real industry that's going on, the full-fledged, the other 91%, the catch on there that we gotta worry about. You know what I mean? Like he's saying, I'm in agreement with that. I mean, but I mean, you gotta do something for the people that are left in it to try to keep them going. If shutting down the people, the full-time people is not gonna, then you have nothing.
Well, and that was the decision you guys made last meeting, was we want to take less cuts to the bushel limits and the seasons by tackling some of these bigger items. So we're glad we can move forward with that.
How much, you said we're not gonna lose or get rid of a full 9%, what do you think it would be?
On the low end, 3%. If it was everyone got rid of everything, it would be 9%. The answer is somewhere between. But
And they want us to.
rather than doing something that's completely quantifiable, we know this is inherently will save, whether it's somewhere between 3 and 9, that would satisfy that 7% cut that we agreed to.
We've also
for
saved a lot of
jurisdictions.
crabs. Everybody sees all the pots on the docks and on the shores everywhere. We've inherently, we have to have some savings from the amount of people that have not been crabbing. That I don't know if the reports show, but that's definitely true. You can ask anybody in here. They should be able to, I think everybody would agree on that.
Yeah, Joe Biden's helping.
So, but when you say an adjustment of agents and saving those percentages, what are you talking about? Getting rid of agents to all the way around?
Somewhere in here, we threw out 3
You know,
options.
if you made it so that it was, as you said it was originally supposed to be,
Yeah, that's what the original.
a temporary measure due to illness, or you're gonna go to a wedding for 3 days or 5 days, and you wanna
You might be
leave
in a national-
you
you
don't
might
wanna
be in a
lose
National
your
Guard, you
spot
gotta
on
go
the
somewhere.
river,
Yeah.
and he just mentioned military
Like
service, like
service, that should be exempt
National
from
Guard.
all. That shouldn't
Ought to
even be a
ought to
question.
be allowed to have an agent.
All right.
But if you
Mr.
went to
Chairman.
something like that, I think
I got one more.
You know,
get a
we're gonna
substantial-
keep on going around circles here.
But we're getting there. I got a feeling. You got a point?
No.
Besides the circle park?
Mr. Chairman, can I?
Yes, sir.
Can I cut this off with a motion?
Well,
I'd like to make a motion that we vote to do away with the full-time agents, and it just become like it was originally for emergency purposes, military service, or items like that, that we can work the details out later, but at least we'll get past this part of it. If we want to keep it, then we'll vote to keep it. If we vote to do away with it, then we'll vote to do away with it. But for emergency purposes only, whatever they might be.
So the number one.
Can
Well,
I,
the
can I
number
ask
one-
some clarifying questions?
excuse me?
Can I ask some clarifying questions?
Sure.
So is that emergency only on a temporary basis? Is it just the temporary basis? Would it include vacations out of state, things like that?
I mean, if you make it on
So-
the, if you put that in them little computers that they got, it'd be just like, they know when I'm going rough culling and when I'm going seed, because conveniently, every time when I get ready to leave out of there, here he comes, hey, Mr. Diggs, how you doing? You know what I mean? Every time, they know, so I don't know if they have a secret communication line in the oyster business, but the crab business, if they could get in on that, they would definitely ride right by you. Like I said, they go 60 miles an hour, they come right by, yep, we see him, he's got his agent for a week or two, I mean, it should be easy.
Well, temporary basis is fine if we can sit down and come up with a general pattern of how this is supposed to work, and it not be somebody that uses it as a business model to double their potential limit on a daily basis.
But to clarify, you're only talking about emergencies, not anyone
Well, if somebody
temporary?
needed to, if that's the only time they could take a vacation, then if somebody wants to okay it, that's fine. I take mine in the winter.
I take my vacation in the wintertime, yeah.
And I think temporary is good enough because, again, if you're talking
Well,
about a
that's fine. I'll
5-day
amend the motion
period.
for it to be temporary basis only.
Can we quit cutting after this?
All right, we have a man in the back here.
If you want to take a couple minutes before you get a second to that motion and take some public comment, it would be a good
I
time.
thought we'd take comment from the public on that. I see a man in the back there. If you would come up, sir, or you can sit there, I'm sure it'll be fine.
They
Would
could
you
come
rather
up.
I come up? If you come up, it'd be good. You'll be on record, and that way your comments will be.
The sound capture is better up there. And then if you could just say your name.
My name is Rich Murray. I'm from the Eastern Shore, Quimby. I've used an agent for the past 3 years. I'm perfectly capable of crabbing myself. I have a wife who became 100% disabled. She requires constant companion. At age, I have several boats, a couple hundred pots, a lot of other infrastructure like refrigerators, freezers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To leave that stuff sit for 3 years would just be my own dumb fault. I'd lose it. Leaving a boat set for 3 years, guess what happens? I'm not doing this because I want to. I'm doing this because I have to. Yet I'm perfectly capable. Fortunately, I found an agent that works for me for 3 years, and he's doing okay. It brings in a little bit of money. I make 2 jobs. I give 2 jobs out to the people in this state on the Eastern Shore, the agent and the little helper that he hires, a high school kid. Him being an agent doesn't take away from the total number of crab licenses that are out there. Whether it's me in the boat or him, it's the same number of licenses, the same allowed catch, the same limits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a cap on the number of licenses that are here. Using an agent doesn't affect that. If you're going to do anything, start looking at your license cap and your latent licenses. Also, I come from another state. I crabbed Maryland for years. The only thing you needed to do, use somebody's license in Maryland, was that person at the time of license renewal put your name on his license. He was your designated person that could run your rig. You could be there, but you only get one limit. You don't double. It's a single license. You're still subject to 1 license capacity. That's all I've got for right now.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
that. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Jenkins.
Doug Jenkins, as I said earlier, that license the agent's going to use is a valid license. So what you're going to do is a person that they can't crab, unable to crab, or would rather somebody use license, they're gonna sell it. So you're not eliminating any crabbers. They're gonna sell that license to somebody gonna crab regular. So that's a problem I have here with y'all talking about, get rid of agents that's gonna help the crabs. That's stupid. And the other thing is, if it's that many agents that's causing that problem of setting more pots, go to the tag thing. That should go anyhow, because there's a lot of good crabbers now, well, I guess you call them good, out there every day, and they're setting more than limit anyhow. So if you want to help the crabs, concentrate on something that's sustainable.
You think the pot tagging would be a good solution, Mr. Jenkins?
I think it is now, because I know a few crabbers, they crab a couple rivers with one set of license with two sets of pots. They go from one, fishing one day and let them soak that set and go to another river. So if you put tags on it, it would eliminate that. But the main thing there was a whole lot of more pots set when I was crabbing younger. Thing it is now, we've just seen recently a lot of young, small crabs. Now, whether they make it to the adult side, I don't know. I don't think they will, because they're about this long now. And as I mentioned to y'all before, with the number of piers around and lights on them, and the rockfish is boiling the water everywhere we go, small ones. And of course, there's a lot of puppet drum this year in the bay that they're having that toll, but we can't address that. We can't address the problem because we hung up on something that doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else from the audience? Yes, sir, come on up.
Daniel Knott. I keep hearing the pot tags thrown out there, and I would just throw out that if you look at all the crabbers and how many pots we have in the water, I would say there's maybe 10% knuckleheads that are breaking that rule. So if we put pot tags out there and make that an enforceable thing, which one, it's probably not enforceable anyway. If we got people running 3 lines of pots in different rivers and everything else, then, you know, that's just not, if it's not enforceable, the police officers will tell you it's not enforceable. Pot tags aren't going to do any better. And all you're doing then is putting a burden on people that do follow the law and follow the rules. You're putting an extra burden on me, because the same guys that are running 1,500 pots are going to keep running 1,500 pots, and they're not going to have the tags on them. And you can't even enforce coal rings. We saw the pictures and everything on the Eastern Shore this year with the coal rings all closed up. You can't enforce coal rings, and how long has that been a rule? So the only people that you're hurting by doing stuff like that would be the guys that don't break the law.
I'm curious how many people are really running 1,200 and 1,500 pots, because I'd like to know what they're putting on them to keep them clean, and how they're keeping up with them, and how they're not, people aren't stealing them, and people aren't fishing them, and everything else. Crabbing in 2 or 3 rivers, you'd be easy to pattern.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, like I said, I think it's probably 10% knuckleheads, and there ain't a field out there that doesn't have 10%
There's
knuckleheads.
places, we don't even, I'm the only crabber, I mean, there's barely no crabbers where I'm at. That guy, he crabs there, Justin, he's up there, there ain't even nobody up there with him, is it, Justin? I've never even seen him. How many times you seen me?
In the distance, I think it's you when I said.
That's what I'm saying, we don't even, so I mean, it's hard for me to really think that it's a whole lot of, I mean, I crab from the James River Bridge to the Chickahominy River, and
Well, you need to come to Cape Charles in the spring of the year if you want to see it.
And I think that's when, and I think that's where the issue
That's
is.
where all this started.
Yep.
Period. And law enforcement, you know, I will say this, I heard they gave them a ticket this year. Somebody did get a ticket.
Good.
Which, it's only taken 10 years, but
well, I mean, I'm just saying, in the summertime, that'd be a hard.
it's not, it's the spring of the year when we're trying to save these crabs. That's the bottom line. It has nothing else to do with anything else. We need to protect the spawning female in the spring of the year, and we're not doing it. The same reason why we shut down crab dredging, you know, and that did nothing. And this most likely, I mean, I hate to say it, agents aren't going to do anything because somebody will buy a license or transfer a license. You know, pot tagging, honestly, I'm against it. But that right there is about the only thing that you can possibly do to even get some kind of impact, period, plain and simple. Yeah, it's going to affect you and me, you know,
That's for
but,
next month.
you know.
Let's get over this hump.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying in general, you know, we're gonna go around in circles, and I'm just over this, to be honest with you.
And just as a agent thing, I'm personally against agents, so, except for medical reasons.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir, come on up.
My name's Justin Johnson. I got a problem with this whole thing. But when I started crabbing, there were no agents. You know, everybody says this was formed for medical reasons only. Well, it was something that shouldn't have been formed in the first place. That's just my personal opinion. But VMRC takes and takes and takes from us. Well, here we are, a bunch of watermen voting to take something from ourselves. You know, when I was a kid, my dad worked himself to death. I knew he was never at a football game. He was never part of the family. I saw him on Sundays. And even then, he was working in the yard. I never got to see my daddy unless I went on a boat with him. Because of these agents, I've been able to be a part of my family, something I've never been able to do without them. I'm able to be at the choir rehearsals for my daughter. I'm able to go on a vacation with my grandfather, who's 85 years old. You know, I'm able to plan things like that. You know, if a boat breaks down, I can go hop, my helper can go jump on the boat with my daddy and go work my rig while I take care of things. You know, everybody talks about the Eastern Shore. It looked like there was only 9 out-of-staters that came down from,
Right.
it was only 9.
You've got locals also.
Yeah, but you got locals too. But I mean, and I get it. There's people out there running a lot more pots.
Yeah, that's-
I have 2 licenses. My helper is an agent on it. Well, as soon as I come inside the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, I don't get to work my full limit. I get 255 pots, not 425 pots. So they gave me a way to remain legal. So I spent the money, invested the money, and the little river that I come from couldn't stand the pressure. I left and went to a big river. You know, and I'm all by myself in that river. You know, I don't work the full limit of both of mine, but I can actually work for a full day. You know, I'm not done at 8 o'clock in the morning wondering how I'm gonna pay my bills next month. I don't want to sit on the side of the road and hustle crabs. The guys up the bay who gotta catch a lot of crabs because they've only got to sell to a truck. The little localized markets we have here, I get to sell to these little shops. I get good money. I get triple, sometimes quadruple with some of these guys who are putting crabs on a truck. You know, I can make it, but some of these guys whose wives have a license and they have a license, you're going to put them completely out of business doing away with it altogether. You know, I don't care about doing away with it in the spring. I'm allowed to work my limit of pots. Summertime, I should be able to use my second license. But that's all I've got to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Any more discussion? We have a motion from Mr. Nixon.
And just as a follow-up, I think one thing I'm hearing from this committee is they value medical exceptions and military exceptions. So when we talk about temporary, that's not for any kind of exception. That's any kind of excuse for not being able to fish your pots. If it is band practice, it's an out-of-state wedding, you could apply for that for 5 days, 7 days, 14, whatever we decide
28
on.
days a year. I mean, that's all you get if you work the job somewhere.
But we could also put in medical exceptions. That might take care of some of these widows that Doug has talked about. It might take care of some of these emergencies that Ken and Pete have talked about. We can mix and match some of these for option 1 or 2 and say, hey, temporary is 5 days for you to be able to take care of. I'm saying 5, we can decide what that is. We could put in 5 days for you to be able to take care of things. But also, we are sympathetic to medical emergencies. We are sympathetic to military service. You could apply for an agent based on those exceptions, and we could grant that. We can mix and match those based on what this committee says is important to them. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we go through voting on some of this stuff.
Okay.
Should I clarify?
Mr. Moore's got a question.
So right now, regardless of agents, we are able to grant medical exceptions and military exceptions without us doing anything, right?
Medical. Yep.
Okay.
And so, as I understand it, following up, Mr. Nixon's motion wouldn't take away from that.
I think we'd still clarify. I think that's what I'm trying to do, is to clarify some of that. Because I think that's what I've heard this committee say, is they want people to be able to have temporary for 5 to 10 days, But they also feel it's really important for them to have that medical exception for those larger things. And that's, I think I'm more trying to clarify what Pete is trying to mirror from this committee.
I mean, for example, if somebody has shoulder surgery, and I had shoulder surgery last October, and I'm still getting to the point where I can finally go fishing again with that arm. And so those kinds of exceptions, when it's documented, a man had rotor cuff surgery, he's gonna be out, he's not gonna be crabbing for 6 months. And then, on those kind of cases, yes, they can get an agent for 6 months. And I think that's a very valid thing, but it's gotta be documented and to some reasonable standard.
We require,
Every 6 months, go back and.
on pretty much all across the board on any of your license, when you talk about a medical exception, we do require medical documentation from a professional.
So the gentleman from Quimby that spoke about his, would he be able to continue on in that regard?
Probably. I mean, we, as staff, we do have the ability to decide what are the hardship.
If you're a primary caregiver, you would,
Yeah. We sometimes use the term non-economic hardship, which I think that could fall under.
Or transfer your license to your,
Okay, Mr. Nixon, you made the motion that what you hear agrees
Yes.
with your.
Yeah, so what I hear here is, for a medical situation, particular hardship, or military.
And do you want to clarify, and maybe we can discuss this after the vote, what an acceptable number of days twice a year for everyone else to have? Is it
Well-
5 days for you to take care of your affairs twice a year? Is it 7 days twice a year? We would like some input on some people who are on the water that need to
Or
go
do we
away.
want to take those as separate motions?
Probably
I
separate
think we should do it as separate motions,
Absolutely.
but I will say that the minimum an employee generally gets when they go to a full-time job is 2 weeks of vacation. So absolutely, that's the minimum now per year. Now, the question is, do you want to make it 3 or 4 weeks where they can do something like that? And you also have the situations like a boat breaks down in the middle of the season, and it's gonna take you a week to fix it, and that costs you another week. Or you wanna be, the man needs to work on his boat, and he needs somebody else to keep his rig in.
And unfortunately, we can't do everything like broken down boats. We
No,
can't
that's
regulate
a
that out,
temporary,
like
that's a temporary agent that is any excuse
7
temporary
days. Yeah.
agent. Yeah.
But I do believe when we talk to staff, 7 days, twice a crabbing year seems reasonable enough for you to take care of affairs. And then the medical and military exceptions that this committee is talking about seems also reasonable.
Anybody got any comment here? All right, we have a motion. We have a second.
I'll second it, so it can be voted on.
Okay, Mr. Powers, a second, the motion. All right, well, any further discussion?
About agent?
About what this motion is, what Mr. Nixon has proposed and it's been seconded by Mr. Powell. Don't hold back.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, all right, anybody else? Okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Put your hands about that.
Thank you.
And all those against, show hands.
Thank you. And I just brought up 2 7-day periods. It seemed like this committee was generally okay with 2 7-day periods. If you'd like some further discussion on that, that's fine as well.
Can I ask a question? Is that on the medical?
No, this is completely separate from medical. If you are medical, I'll grant it for the year. But that should be generally medical, or 1 year, maybe you have longer lasting things. So this is for everyone else to be able to take care of affairs, a broken down boat, a funeral, a vacation, whatever it is, 2 7-day periods.
I wonder if the concept, well, first off, I don't know the answer to, is it worth it? If you're gonna go, or can you leave your gear in the water for 3 days because you've got a wedding to go to over the weekend or something? So you're gonna leave on Thursday, come back on Monday?
But then you do hinder, if you're hindering businesses, you're stopping interstate commerce and people and stuff, it is better to keep people at work and stuff. I mean, just because you're a crabber, you shouldn't be able to, you need something to do, you should be able to.
Yeah, so the question is, does it need to be 7 contiguous days? Or could it be, or is it like 2 weeks of vacation, you can take 2 days at a time or
So,
a day at a time?
logistically, for us to be able to keep track on this and enforcement-wise, it has to be 7. You could go, the idea that we've played with is you could log onto your online account, which everyone is using for harvesting, and apply for an agent right there, fill out your agent's information, and it would print you out something that lists those 7 days that you've asked for. It has to be 7 contiguous days, and you could do that twice a year, and that's the only way we can logistically track that for law enforcement
So if
stuff.
it's 7 contiguous days, then I would say that it's not sufficient. And I would ask you, staff, to look at the agents that you have working now and see how many of them would be, or it's a concept for the business model, I guess. How many of them would be agents if they could only do it 28 days a year? Or, how many of them work as agents for less than 30 days a year?
So I don't have number of days, but I have percent of trips. I can turn that into number of days.
So, I mean, that's the concept of where you set that boundary. You want to set it someplace where people who legitimately, need the ability to, take some time off during the crabbing season and have their helpers or whoever works on the boat with them be their agent for that period of time, can do that a reasonable number of times a year without it being abused, and it still becomes a temporary thing. And it's not an emergency, but, it's mental health days, that's important, although I think being on the water would be better mental health than
So we're talking about days, that's what we want to do here. Anybody got any more thoughts on days? No. They like the 7 and 14 total? 7 contiguous, 14 total?
So that's less than this, half.
And 7 to 14 was just a range. 7 seems like the right number. That's 2 weeks a year.
I mean, if it does work good and stuff, going forward, you don't have any problems, then if you wanted to break it down where they issued you a permit, the same way they do a James River transfer permit, it really wouldn't be a big logistical issue. I don't think, he legitimately just types your stuff in and the next guy's got it. So, if this works good, you could always tweak it to make it if somebody wanted to do it. They can communicate enough there that they know where you're at.
Adam, you agree with that?
I do agree that this is setting a precedent, kind of going forward, what we want this fishery to look like.
Yeah.
As you know, we do annual management on this. This is something we can visit back to, depending on winter dredge surveys, depending on the needs of the fishery, the industry. If 2 7-day periods, if we need to expand, reduce, contract that, I believe it's something we can do in the future, but getting over this hill and setting that precedent is important to react to that winter dredge survey.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Powers?
I have a question about the medical
Oh, no,
exemption.
let's stick with the days.
Okay, the days, I'm done talking about days.
Okay. We got it sorted out. How many days are we gonna do?
How
So,
many 7-day periods, because they've already said.
2 7-day periods is what we got up here. Anybody don't do that?
I'm fine with
So that's, you make a motion then, Mr. Nixon, again?
it. I'll make a motion that it be 2 7-day periods.
Okay. We got a second? Mr. Diggs?
I'll second it.
All right. All right. Any more thoughts?
Yeah,
Comments?
they can always adjust that bill. It's not like they're married to it.
All right.
The 7
All in
days,
favor?
is that taking Sunday into account?
Just 7 days.
7 calendar days.
I can remove Sundays. for
So
that.
it's only, so you could have 7 days
7
not counting
fishing
the
days.
Sunday.
7 fishing days.
That's what
Sure. That's reasonable.
okay.
Great.
It's a great addition.
All right.
Is that,
Well,
does that need to be part of the motion, or do we just want to go ahead
well,
with it?
because it's a whole day anyway, that's kind of, I think, it's just not part of the.
It's 2 7 fishing
equation,
days.
so to speak.
Okay.
You're not allowed to crab on Sundays anyway, it shouldn't even be a consideration.
Yeah. All right, all in favor of the motion, signify with hand up. All right.
JC, is your hand up or no? Are you, okay.
All right, you got it, Alexa?
Yep.
All right, all in against, hand up. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate our progress this far. I mean, I know that it's not what anybody wants to be doing. I feel bad about it. I mean, doggone, y'all are hardworking people. I hate putting restrictions on hardworking people. It doesn't make any sense in many regards. However, we are where we are.
We have about 35 minutes left in this meeting. The other thing we wanted to talk about tonight was transfers. And I think someone mentioned earlier about cleaning up some of this latent effort. We have almost 1,200 licenses in the fishery, about 1,000 of them bought every year, and maybe about 800 of them used. So the idea is if those surveys come back good, and if there's abundance of crabs, we don't want to completely undo some of these savings we're putting in by people jumping into the fishery and trying to capitalize when those crabs
Shouldn't
come
we
up.
work on getting what the guys are actually out there crabbing, getting them a little piece of the pie back before we go turning anybody else? I mean, wouldn't that
Exactly,
make
and I
sense
think
to
that's
try
what
to-
we're going to look at right now with transfers, is if you have no activity, we probably don't want you jumping right back into this. We want to be able to have the guys who are continually harvesting this to be able to reap the benefits of some of these modifications that we've made. So that's what we're going to look at right now in the next about 30 minutes before this meeting ends.
Okay, all right, thank you for keeping us on schedule.
So again, I'll put some background information up before we get into the options. So here are total licenses eligible, sold, and active for 2021. So usually when you see this graph, it's just for crab pots, but this includes all gears. And you can see it divvied up by gear on the left there. So you can see right now, latent effort in 2021 was 52% of eligible licenses were not used.
What's that? I can't understand.
Here it is for crab pot licenses. This is the one we usually show you in our May presentations.
So we'll go back to that slide. So what you're really talking about is it's smaller rigs are the ones that are the latent effort, correct?
It looks like that, yeah.
I mean, a lot of guys have had to spend the money, myself, a lot of people bought and bought to try to get the bigger ones. And since we took our pots, it used to be 500, 300 and everything like that. And we didn't have a choice. People bought so they could set more pots and catch more crabs, especially once the limits came on. I mean, that's why you're seeing them people phased out. I mean, that's why if you looked at it throughout the years, you'll see that the people, the most recently sold licenses, you pull the stats up, it's definitely the 425. You see it online, they sell because people are actively trying because they want to set more pots, they want to catch more limits. They obviously don't want to break the law, they're trying to do it right.
Right, it makes sense. Yeah, interesting. Mr. Moore has a comment.
Two questions. One, can you go back one slide? So I just, dip netting, we're really down to that, because that used to be much more popular like on Tangier, places like that.
I double checked that number
Okay.
myself, and we had one person reporting harvest using DipNet.
Okay. Second question is, based on what we did back in '08, do we still have the waiting list? Are people still on the waiting? They are. So
We do. We have, I think,
So-
about
so-
100 people left on that.
Okay, so the numbers that you're showing on this slide don't include the wait. That's a whole separate thing.
That's correct.
No, it just, perspective, 2008, the waiting list was 867 people. 524 were hard pots, 343 were pure pots. Currently this year, after attrition, we are down to 115 individuals on that waiting list to get their death, to get their card renewed, whatever the case may be, transferred away. So 77 hard pots and 38 pure pots. So that waiting list has come way down from what it was in 2008.
Can you repeat that? Did you say there's only 77 hard crab pots on the waiting list, and how many peeler pots?
38.
38.
So the option we're talking about is a mirror of the oyster user fee transfer system. So in oysters, licensee must have worked 40 days in the previous fishing year in order to be able to transfer their license outside their immediate family. There's no restrictions on transferring to immediate family. They're currently in the process, they've been talking to CMAC about making exceptions if the licensee has medical hardship, military orders, or has passed away. They don't necessarily, I think, last I heard what they were looking at was the previous 2 or 3 seasons. They check for activity to make sure if someone was sick in the previous year, they're not being cut out. So we'd be looking at, we're recommending a similar system. And like we said with the agent, we're just putting the concept up. If there's tweaks you want to make, do you want to do the previous season? Do you want to do the previous 2 or 3 years check for activity? How many days of activity do you want to be the cutoff? Like I said, oysters, it's 40. But once we get into that discussion, or if you want, I can go into it right away. I do have information on how many days are currently being worked by our licensees.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Question. How about if that license was only active by an agent?
That would count.
That would count, okay.
So let's say we had this in place for next year, then if someone had an agent this year, worked, let's say we make it 40 days, their agent worked 45 days, and they say, oh, well, I can't get an agent next year, so I'd like to transfer it, they'd still meet the activity trigger to be able to transfer it outside immediate family.
Okay.
Got a question down there too.
I'm trying to figure out how to word this right. I want to get rid of this so that there's less pressure and stuff harvested from people coming back in. If people lie to get the days to transfer, it's gonna show more. Like there's latent effort now, people aren't reporting anything. We do this, they're gonna just BS some reports and it's gonna act like the catch has gone up and it really hasn't. I just want everybody to think about that.
The harvest reporting system has built-in checks and balances. One of those is buyer audits. So yes, everything will come out of the buyer. If you are reporting harvest that doesn't exist, it will catch up with you.
A question about your buyers reporting, and now you have the online reporting for harvest. Is the buyers reporting computerized so that you can get your database wizard to put the two together?
We are currently looking at hiring a person specifically dedicated to that. Now that we're online, it's freed up time to shift some of our positions from coding these folders and managing these folders every month to being more buyer-centric and cleaning up that side. So yes.
I think that it would be spectacular if, as part of the transfer checks, you went back and said, oh, we also checked the buyer's reports and they match more or less, because there is a certain amount of self-marketing. And, okay, so you can transfer because we have two good indicators that
We check up on whatever days we set this at. We do our due diligence and make sure those are actual.
It is working for the oyster.
Absolutely.
At this time, so it's not as though without a template.
And just right off the bat, I believe, again, we can put in an exception for medical, military, or passed away. This committee said those things are important. So what I really think we need is, yes, we want those exceptions. How many days is good for a blue crab fisherman to say, yes, I'm active, I want to transfer to someone else? And what is that qualifying period? Am I just looking at the previous year? Any combination of 30 days in the previous 2 years? What do you think is fair to allow people to transfer and not take away people's licenses, but to make it so it is more difficult to overcapitalize on any gains that some of these other regulatory things we put in are making.
I was just saying, like, it's really not that many people transferring in. I can't see nobody really wanting to really buy, 'cause it's not cheap. But if you look on the transfers that have been going on recently, I would just like to see how many of them just went from a guy just upping his license to where their transfer wasn't like, we didn't bring somebody else into the fishery. Because I know it's been a ton of guys that have sold the 255s to get to the 425s, you know what I mean? So it's, we're not, you know, I don't want us to get caught up thinking we're bringing that many people into the fishery, because like I said, it's not that many people out there. It's not really that. I cannot see that many people shelling out the money to buy the permits, buy the boats, and then go rig up crab pots, and then hope they're allowed to go crabbing. You know what I mean?
So
I don't know the transfer. I don't know if we should get too crazy about it. Do something similar to the oysters, but I don't know if we should go too crazy, because I don't think you're going to see that. I mean, you go put crab pot licenses for sale right now, then you go put oyster licenses for sale. Your inbox will run slam over for the oyster licenses, and you can sit there like, is my phone broke or what? And put the crab license.
So I definitely wouldn't say that most of the transfers are swaps. They go into our system differently. So here's some information on the transfers. I didn't quantify swaps, but they would have shown up differently if they'd been one, and I didn't see all that many. So this is for the last 3 years what the transfers have looked like. We do 100 up to 100 general transfers per year. That does not include transfers within an immediate family. It also doesn't include if the licensee has passed away. So in 2019, we hit the full 100 in December. In 2021, we did not hit the transfer cap. And in 2022, we still have 20 general transfer slots open, last I checked.
Yes, sir.
Alexis, in the oyster part of it now, we had a control date that we established, and we had a number of fishermen, oystermen. We put a number on it, 600, I think, or 650. I haven't heard anything about that. When would the people be able to reinstate, you know, when the fishery gets to a viable level?
So this is a little bit different than oysters. The intent of oysters was to decrease the number of license holders because the fishery could not hold that many license holders. So the idea was there was 900, and we believe the fishery could hold 600 and something. This is not the case in blue crabs. We're not trying to eliminate licenses. We're not trying to get down to a certain number. Once those licenses are gone, they're actually gone. That's not the intent. The intent is if you want to hold on to your blue crab license, by all means hold on to it. We're not trying. What we're trying to do is create some hurdles so that everyone doesn't jump back in when the getting's good. So we're not trying to get down to a number. We're just trying to say, hey, if use your license if you want to use it. So it is a little bit different in that way.
You're trying to create stability, essentially.
Correct.
Now, people holding on to them for retirement to sell them. I mean, like, you know, they're not active, they're not gonna be able to sell them later.
Medical, military, deceased. So generally, when you get up in age and you retire, you probably do have some medical issues that maybe, if not, there is that gray area there.
I mean, if somebody stopped crabbing and didn't crab for 2 or 3 years, and you could see where they were active to the last year that they worked, they should still be able to. I mean, if you put the control date on it as right now, and then whenever they did it, you should be able to tell if they were active when they quit or if they're just making it up.
And retirement is applying for Social Security.
Yeah, I mean, it's something. I don't know all that.
Some of it sounds
be
good, but it's difficult to regulate,
Yeah.
or write a regulation that fits all those.
Well, what you'd be doing is you'd be, I don't know whether you want to say forcing somebody to go ahead and get rid of their license when they quit, instead of sitting on it.
Pipe dream that the MRCs and that.
Mr. Moore?
We, just about control dates, we do have a control date in blue crab, right? It's just, it was back in like '08. It's not as,
Are you talking about for the waiting list?
yeah, I think it's, yeah.
So the waiting list, people can come off that once the female abundance hits 215 million crabs in 2 out of 3.
3 years in a row.
Okay.
But I thought we adopted a control date then too. Maybe we didn't. It's a long ago.
I'll look, Chris.
Okay, look, yeah, if you don't mind, just check on that.
All right, we had a question from the audience.
Just a question for them. What happens to the catch that goes directly out of state from a harvester? How you gonna account for that? You're gonna check with my buyers?
We can, but that would be relying more on harvest reports at that point, because if that's out of state, and out of state don't necessarily need licenses from the state of Virginia.
Okay. Well, Leslie, you still got some more input for us.
So this is if we want to talk about the number of harvest days for activity. Now this is two different ways of showing essentially the same information. So the top graph says, I'll talk about the numbers in the bars. 92 active watermen fished between 0 and 10 days last year. 82, that's number of watermen fished between 10 and 20 days, and so on. The percentage is 100% of active harvesters fished more than 0 days. Makes sense. 88% of active harvesters fished more than 10 days, and so on. And then the bottom graph is the numbers represent absolute numbers. So 771 watermen fished more than 0 days. 679 watermen fished more than 10 days. So this is some information you can use if you want to figure out where to draw that line for activity.
That's a lot of numbers for me to figure out where to draw a line, Alexa.
So I'll say
I guess it's.
oysters is at 40, so that would draw the line right here.
Crab is twice as long as season.
Yeah, but the seasons are different.
So you're saying say that when we're
Yeah,
done?
just saying as a guide, you know.
Yeah, just saying for reference, the oyster 40 days would draw the line right here.
Gotcha.
So
You didn't happen to graph this as a distribution function, did you?
I did not.
Because then it's easier to see where the tail is and say, we're gonna cut it off at the tail. I could almost see it. I would say that if you're looking at the data somewhere between the 40 and 30 is kind of where the tail of the distribution starts to go down. And you're saying not a lot of people hit that number. But the real question is, what's the full-time crabber?
Full-time, not 40 days.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Is it 40 days, or do you want to make it something like, 50, 60 days?
I don't think,
But if it's
I don't
somebody
think
that-
the intent is to limit transfers to only full-time watermen. We don't want this so punitive that people can't reach it.
I mean, I don't think that many people, is that many people really transferring in? And if so, where are they transferring in at?
At least 100 people a year, we almost max out, so at least 100 people are transferring in this fishery. So, and this is during a time that probably blue crabbing isn't the best. So you can imagine during good times that people were trying to get into something that was lucrative, we would have interest in a lot more. So we're not trying to eliminate those 100, we're trying to make it so you can transfer, we just want to slow the faucet.
Again, we're looking for stability.
Stability, so we
So-
don't undo some of these gains.
Yeah, so 2019, we hit that 100 general transfer caps. We don't know how many people would have ideally transferred in that year.
Something with limits or something like that.
Yeah. Sanford.
I'm on the transfer cap. I mean, you've only transferred like 80 for 2022. So what if you just drop the cap down a little bit? Would that do anything?
You'd still be you could still potentially be turning inactive licenses active.
Right.
And I think if we went to activity, we could actually get rid of that cap, because you're keeping active licenses active.
Right.
And if someone decides they want to start using your license, they can absolutely do that.
Are we gonna,
Yes, sir, go
Are we
ahead.
gonna look at if things do get better down the road, changing the stuff back?
I think that's the idea of engaging this committee, is for be able to mold this long-term. That
You don't get
when-
that back.
As the surveys come back
That's been
better.
the whole thing since I've been around. We never get anything back, but there's a lot of older people crabbing now and no young people. So that's why I'm asking.
Okay. Alexia, you have any more data you want us to take a look at with regard to days fished?
I think that's it. So I guess the question is, do we want to pursue this option, which is, like I said, similar to the oyster fishery as they're working on? Right now, they don't have that exception for medical hardship or when a licensee passed away. That's something they're working on with CMAC, hopefully to put into place soon. So we're trying to not start from behind on that. So the question is, do we want to do this? And then, if so, how do we want to do this?
Do we want to take a vote on whether we want to do it or not? Start with, how about that? We'll take
Should we
one
take
step
any
at a time.
public comment?
I have a question.
Yes, sir, go ahead, Mr. Powell.
What about the person who is slowly retiring from the industry? And 5 years ago, the man was working, or woman, was working on the water. Put up your chart again if you could, so I can pick a good number. Was working on the water 120 days a year. That's a lot. And over the last 5 years, their health is starting to get not so good, but they're still able to work, put in a good day. And now they're down to 30 or 40 days a year because they're picking the best times to go. But you know, they earned it because they worked hard for all those years before. How can we structure the system so that somebody like that can still transfer their license?
A few different ways. You can structure it so the activity barrier is lower, or you could say they have to have met that activity cap in not just the last year, but the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever.
I mean, it's
30
somehow,
days in one of the last 3
It all
years.
should be on that computer if they all file it in. You should be able to look back. If you see, I see what he's saying. If you see the guy, because I mean, there is guys that work, hardcore, and then they'll pick. You see it happen all the time. They'll start working the nice times of the year, and then he won't crab the spring, and then he'll only crab the summer when it's nice. I mean, that guy shouldn't be exempt from.
and then
getting rid of
the
his
other thing,
license.
when you're starting to talk about days worked, is the man who oysters in the winter, or in the fall and spring, or whenever they can.
Because they're still full-time watermen. They should still be able to sell
And
their-
gill nets when the gill netting's good, and then he's crabbing in the spring because we can get good money in the spring.
So
And,
sounds
you know,
sounds like
and-
you're getting it maybe about 30 days in one of the previous 3 years to really give that leeway for
Yeah,
someone.
But especially if it's got, the person has other commercial fishing activities.
I mean, you can tell, can't
So
you?
it doesn't have to be, so I think what Tom's getting at is it doesn't have to be fishing for blue crab days.
He's got a
Any
moderate
active days.
amount of blue crab days, but then you look across the board and the man's working 130 days a year, 140 days a year, some relatively big
I mean, if he's
number.
active in Virginia's commercial fishing, he should. be able to
So
sell
any
those.
active days, any active 30 days in the previous 3 years, it's a good starting spot.
Something like that. I mean, you
for
gotta
this.
start somewhere.
Just not crabbing. I mean, if you crab, if you gill net, if you're hook and liner, you're active. I understand that nowadays watermen need
No,
to jump between,
not-
and if you're getting money for oysters, you're not gonna set crab pots.
No,
That's
I would
reasonable.
say that 30 days for a full-time waterman is not full-time. I would say that you can put a cap on the number of crab pot days, but if you're gonna use a cap for the number of doing anything commercial waterman-wise, it's gotta be like a full-time job.
And
I work 200 days a year, you know?
I don't think the intent of this is to only allow transfer for full-time watermen.
No,
It's to
but it's
create
gotta
some
be-
kind of baseline stability.
But it's gotta be more of a full-time, if you're gotta, so if you have, so I would propose that if I were doing it, or if it was just what I would say, I would propose some relatively large number if all you do is crab. If all you've got for landings is crabs, then it should be 50 or 60 days. But if you also do other commercial fishing activities to the tune of at least 100 days a year, then it can be as low as 20 days. Because that's the man or woman that is going out when the, is selectively working different commercial gear to make the most profit at the time of year when they make it.
And it
I
gets
mean,
a-
some old,
but
some
it is-
old guys just don't want to quit, dude. Honestly, like, I feel you on this, but some of them guys, they just want to go and go and go, and you shouldn't take that right from him. I mean, he wants to fish his stuff out. I mean, he doesn't want to sell. It's hard for some of them to quit. I mean,
No, this is only to transfer.
that is selling.
We got 10 minutes to go, and I think let's go back to, do we want to do this or not?
Never said we want to.
And then we'll go to the number of days, how about that? Let's take it a little bit at a time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
the one thing that I want to see us talk about, I guess we're going to run out of time, is the amount of time that you have to hold on to a license before you can transfer it. And
That won't be settled tonight. It's a completely different
Well, see,
discussion.
that, if we don't do that, then that ruins this whole agent thing.
I think that is an important part of having this
Because
work.
what guys will do is just transfer their license to whoever and then come over and do it again. Plus, we've had a problem over the years with people churning licenses, being able to pick one up reasonably priced and then turn it over and resell it.
And yes, that exists, but I don't think it's the overwhelming majority as far as impacts on the winter dredge survey. You're right that it does exist. But I don't think that it's rampant enough in our system that that's the root of all our problems.
But if we're gonna do it, let's do it right.
So it's going to become a problem, or we've wasted the whole vote on the other thing.
So are you saying that licenses can only be transferred once per year, once per every 2 years? Is that what you're?
I'd stretch it out to somewhere between 3 years and 5 years. Because you're not gonna have somebody that's gonna take a license that potentially could be worth $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 and give it to a guy and then all of a sudden, year and a half down the road, that guy's gonna quit. And he said, I'm not giving you your license back, it's mine.
So I think you're talking about having that be what people do instead of having their agent, their full-time agent, they transfer it for the year.
Yeah.
Especially if they trust the person.
You gotta trust that person.
That's
No rights to that license once you transfer.
That's a big loophole that can't be overlooked.
So, yay or nay on doing the transfer system somewhat similar to the oyster crab?
A comment on before we vote?
Hang on. Let's-
Okay.
Is that something we want to do? I just want to say,
My comment is, do you want to, is the purpose of this, to be clear, is to stop latent effort from becoming active effort? That's what this is.
Yes.
And if that's what the people who do this for a living want, I may abstain because I don't, but.
That's not what he was just talking about,
What?
That's not what Pete was just talking about.
No, that's not the question that he's asking. That's the next question, or for a next meeting, but.
I mean, you'd probably do more good, honestly, for the fishery, just putting, to make it so you had to hold it a couple of years for the transfers than you were going on
Okay,
crazy
so
about
there's a
doing the other way.
separate, yeah.
You know what I mean? Than trying to do, to make it to, if somebody's license is active, it's active. I mean, that's gonna be hard to, because some guys phase themselves out. But I mean, I can understand what you're saying about like the transfer and use it, resell it and that. I mean, I don't know. It'd be hard to, it's hard for me to get down with telling somebody they can't sell their license that they use forever. So I don't know.
I wouldn't want to tell somebody they couldn't sell it.
Oh, yeah.
But if they're gonna use it as an opportunistic move, and that's all, and they're not serious about being in the fishery, then make them hold on to it for a reasonable amount of time. You know, if it's 3 years, it's 3 years, but not where they could turn around and give it to some different mate every season.
All right, so my question remains, do we want to pursue this or not?
I don't think we got enough time tonight.
To me, it would be yay, nay, and then how many days on the fishery, and then we move on. This is a recommendation only, it's not like we're writing this, the Ten Commandments or something. Go ahead.
I make a motion that we take, similar to oyster user fee transfers, but, with the medical hardship, military orders, and pass away exceptions, and I'd say it should be 30 days of activity.
Over the previous year, previous 3 years?
Or
Probably-
any of the previous, or
Right.
average over, are the kind of questions.
Yeah, average over 3 years, something like that.
Average over 3 years, not
Yes.
any of the 3 years?
Yes.
Average of the 3 years.
Yeah, because it might taper down if somebody's getting old.
I just want to, the reason why the shellfish, the oyster is changing this is because right now it's 1 year. And we've had folks that, they die during the fishing season. They have 37 days of effort. And there's nothing in the regulation that allows you, there was nothing in the regulation to allow that to transfer. And those people end up in front of our commission begging for it, and they get it. It makes sense.
Sure.
So that's why a couple of years is much better, either an average or, however we want to do it, but don't just do 1 year. I think 30 days is probably reasonable. We don't want to restrict transfers. We just want to make sure that, those licenses are being used appropriately.
Mr. Moore.
The oyster is 40 days now, right?
Yeah,
And that's just on the last year.
just on the last year.
Past year.
But the project will be adjusting the days, I mean, not the days, the time.
The number of years. You're either gonna go to 2,
Yeah,
3,
you're
or
gonna
an
keep the days
average or
the
something
same.
like that.
Okay, so we have a motion.
Just 30 days, average on the previous 3 years.
Second anywhere?
I'll second it so it can be voted on.
Howard seconds. Thank you, Mr. Garfield. Okay, all in favor signify with a hand up.
Clean sweep.
All right, all opposed, hand up.
We had 10-4, so that's,
Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate it, guys. I hope I'm not pushing y'all too hard to do things you don't want to do, but I feel like we gotta keep moving.
So I-
We're not, let's have perfection tonight.
Right, but I do think that when you're putting in these kinds of transfer restrictions and doing away with the agency at the same time, if the commission does both those things for sure, that we should be listening to Pete. And staff can decide whether it's 3 or 5 years, but the concept that you have to hold on to a license that has been transferred for a minimum number of years is important.
And if the committee thinks it's important, that's something we can work through to shape this fishery for the next 5 years. I think that's been important to this.
But
because
you
I've
need
heard
to
a lot
do
of
it,
reaction
you need to
instead
do
of
it before
proactive.
you need to do that before the end of this year, when you start doing your transfers, start allowing more transfers again.
Can we discuss that and vote on it at our next meeting, whenever that would be?
Absolutely, we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Well, we're going to do
Vote on it now.
pot tagging next meeting too.
Pot tagging, realistically, with the regulatory obstacles with the new administration, pot tagging is not realistic for 2023. It would be realistic for 2024, so that
we
does give
probably
us
would have
some
needed to
time.
order the tags by this time already.
Can we at least maybe start discussing, because I think there's a
Yes.
large
Yeah,
dichotomy.
and these are the things we wanted to get through first, because we know we can do them in 2023 and have an impact. But the other things are a little more long-term.
I got something to say about that. I have a question to staff.
But had a man down here.
This is about pot tagging. Who's gonna enforce that? They don't look at your buoy now, and I'm not talking bad about law enforcement. You think they're gonna go pull everybody's pots and look at the tag?
I have been talking to law enforcement. That's something we can cover at the next meeting.
How are you gonna get how are you gonna get people their pot tags back? If some people
Burden for us, an expense for somebody else.
I mean, everybody doesn't do that.
You know, again, I mean, the reality of it is, we gotta get in control on the number of pots going in the water in the spring of the year, is what it comes down to. You know, I mean, like I said, I don't want pot tagging, but it may be the only thing that we can do. Transfers of licenses are gonna occur. Agents are gonna work on the water again this spring.
They'd all be on the
Period.
beach. And it
You
wouldn't
know.
be-
And I think that's for future meeting. There is a lot to talk about, and that's why we don't want to just try and shove it in right now.
You know.
So we adjourned then?
Well,
Is that-
and another, you know, and I'll say it again, maybe law enforcement should look at the penalties for, you know, call rings or just to deter the activity of putting too many pots over. You know, maybe that would work. Who knows?
So right now, the number of pots, it's very hard to enforce because the judge won't follow it if they say we counted,
Right.
500 buoys. They'd say, well, are you sure each one had a pot attached? Or are you sure it was a crab pot?
Correct. Well, I'm not
And
just talking that.
from our feedback from the Potomac River, the pot tags are a lot more enforceable because they can see the tag on the buoy and they can count those tags, and that's enforceable. Like I said, I have been talking to law enforcement. That's something we can bring up at the next meeting. It's probably going to be more than one meeting for pot tagging. Like we said, it's probably going to be 2024, so we don't have to get the entire program set next meeting.
Now, what about the crab pots that are on the dock with undersized call rings? They can't do anything about it.
Basically, they can do something that costs you more money by giving you crab pot tags, and that's gonna only hurt the full-time guy. The part-time guy's gonna have plenty of extra ones, all his lost tags. The guy that's crabbing full-time in the springtime, for instance, myself, when you lose 40 pots in the middle of the night, in the middle of the bay, how are you gonna get some tags to go in your pots? Oh, we're gonna wait, the most lucrative time of the year, we'll wait, we'll go down to VMRC and get
Take a
them.
day off and come get some more.
Yeah, I know, it only costs you $700-800 that day to quit. I mean, that's good if you crabbed in a creek somewhere and lose 5 pots a year. If you lose 200 a year,
This change we made on the agent law, that the committee made, will that go before the commission next month?
No,
That gonna be brought
no,
up?
it will be in place for 2023. We have to find the appropriate one.
What can
for
we
it.
do about the
Possibly
equal
December,
distribution?
January. There is a new regulatory process in effect. There's a new Office of Regulatory Management in the state that we have to work with. So, next month, we just don't have enough time.
Does that mean the commission can no longer do emergency regulations?
We don't know yet. We don't know yet.
No,
Excellent
there's
question.
just some detail. We still have the authority to be able to do emergency regulations. Just there's some details in the background that have yet to be provided.
I'm just curious, or what can we do, or something about these bushel limits dropping, or at least getting them to be proportional, because we're effectively killing the crab pot industry October 4th, at least for the big guys. I just don't see how we're getting cut 40% and the other guys are not. How can that fly?
I think that's a good thing to look at. I think when the winter dredge survey is so low, it is hard to justify expanding bushel limits. But
It's just
I
not
do-
fair. He loses 20 and I lose 40. You're not treating everybody the same.
I agree, it's something that probably should be looked at by this committee.
That's insane. I know, but something should be done about that. That's not even, how does he lose 20? You go from 29 to 21, you lose 8 bushels. I go from 47 to 27, I lose 20. Get the percentages on that. That's how can you treat one person different than the other? I just don't understand. How? Why? Where's the logic behind that?
It's the same way when you bought them.
Huh?
The percentage was the same way when you got your license.
No, it wasn't a limit when I got my license.
And it went to what, 50? Yes, it was.
It was 51 bushels was the limit then. It
Yeah,
wasn't-
the other one's 29.
No, everybody was on a 51 bushel limit when I bought my license. Everybody could catch 51 bushels. And there wasn't no limit after June 1st or May, something like that. There wasn't even a limit for anybody. All this came into effect recently. That didn't used to be like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's something we can definitely take up. We can only do so much at a time. Catch 40-some bushels every 255. You've got a sympathetic ear. Adam?
That's all on our agenda for tonight.
Okay. You got it.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, sir. Second, and some more. Thank you. All in favor? have now is what I'm gonna have next year.